We are now going to take a look at the Theme Customizer API. The Theme Customizer is WordPress's UI for customizing the theme. This is enabled by default for you already. You can view this customizer by going to Entity Admin Dashboard and navigating to Appearance, Customize. On the sidebar, you'll find a few options for changing the theme, and you'll see our theme being displayed on the right. Let's see how this works. Click on Site Identity and try changing the site title. Right after making these modifications, WordPress will actually update the preview. What WordPress is doing is loading the site inside an iframe. Every time a change happens, WordPress will refresh the iframe with the modified data. Keep in mind that this doesn't take an official effect until you click Save. What makes this customizer even more powerful is that developers are provided an API to add their own options and settings. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create some settings to add social links in the header and footer. We're going to make everything here dynamic. Open up the functions file and add an action hook. The action we want to hook into is called Customize Register. This is the hook WordPress calls when it starts to set up the theme customizer. The function to call will be called JU Customize Register. Create a file called themecustomizer.php inside the includes folder and define the function here. Lastly, include this file from the functions file. This function will be passed in one variable named WP-Customize. This is an object with methods and properties for modifying the theme customizer. This object is an instance of the WP Customize Manager class. I'll provide a link to this class in the resource section of this lecture. This class controls how the customizer works and most of its basic functionality. We'll be going over how this works shortly. Before we begin working on the customizer, there are 3 important concepts you need to know. If you don't understand right away after I explain it, that's fine. I'll be showing you how it works soon enough. So, there are 3 steps you'll usually take when working with the customizer directly. The first step is adding a setting. The setting is just a value that you save in the database and can be modified through the customizer. You can then use this value in your theme. The second step is creating a section. A section is a way to group a bunch of fields together. If you look at the customizer, you'll notice things are grouped together instead of just displaying every option together. This makes it easier to control and navigate around. The third step is creating a controller. A controller is just an input field, checkbox, color picker, or uploader that allows you to change the setting you made in step 1 directly. Let's get started with the customizer. The object passed in has a couple of methods. The method for adding a new setting is called addSetting, and it's called like so. This method has 2 parameters. The first is the ID. Like anything else, the ID is something that should be unique so we can refer to it later. I'm going to set this to JU Facebook handle. The next parameter is an array of settings. I'm going to provide a link to the resource section for more information about this method. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see a few settings you can set. Most of them are optional except one setting, which is the default key. I'm going to set this as an empty string. That's all you need to do. One thing I should mention is this setting called transport. This controls how the value is reflected on the main theme during preview mode. By default, it's set to refresh. This means that when this value is changed, then the page will refresh and show that value. If you want to control how this value is reflected on the theme, you will need to set this to post a message. However, refresh will work 90% of the time, so we'll leave that value as is. This value will now be saved in the database, and it can now be manipulated through controllers and be displayed on our theme. We have to create a section first. To create a section, we have to call the addSection method. The first parameter is the ID for this section. I'm going to call this JU Social Section. The second parameter is an array of settings. The title will be translatable, and I'll set it to Udemy Social Settings. Next is the priority. The lower the number, the higher the placement it will receive, and vice versa. I'm going to set this to 30. There's one last method I want to call, which is the add control method. This method will create an input field and add it to a particular section of your choosing. This method is a bit tricky because there are two ways you can set this up. The first way is to pass in the settings and have more control over it. However, this tends to be confusing if you don't know what you're doing. The second route is to pass in an object that will help you create the field you'd like to create. We'll be using the second route because it's really easy to get started. In the resource section, I provide a link to the add control method. Scroll down to the classes section. This section provides a couple of classes that can be passed in that will assist us with filling in the blanks. The WP Customize Control class will help you create fields such as text, radio buttons, checkboxes, and drop-downs. The Color Control will create a color picker for you. The Upload Control will create a field for uploading files. The Image Control also does something similar to the Upload Control, except you can only upload images. These other two are unimportant to us as WordPress uses these internally for its own purposes, so we won't be messing with them at all throughout this lecture. For our purposes, the first class is perfect for us since we want to create a text field for the user's handle. I'm going to click this and you'll see that WordPress provides an example on how this works. I'm going to copy and paste this and go over what's going on. The first parameter is the customizer object itself. The controller needs to know more about what's happening in the customizer so it can fill in the blanks for you. The second parameter is the ID for this controller. I'm going to set this as JU Social Facebook Input. The last parameter is an array of additional settings. We will only concern ourselves with these 4 keys. The label is just text to describe the field. This should be a translatable string. I'm going to set this as Facebook handle. The section is where it'll appear. We created our own section called JU Social Section. We'll assign this control under this section. The next key is settings, which is what setting will this field modify. We created this in step 1. The value for this will be JU Facebook handle. The last key is type, which is what kind of field this will be. By default, it'll be text. There's also radio, text area, etc. You can find all the types of fields in the documentation. For now, the default is fine. I'm actually just going to remove this key. We are now finished with the customizer. Let's refresh the customizer and you will now see this new section called Udemy Social Settings. After clicking it, you will now see the controller. I'm going to input Udemy and save this setting. However, nothing in the preview will change because we haven't told WordPress where we'd like to use this setting. Let's review what we did on our customizer function first. The first step was to create the setting, which is the value that's stored in the database. The second step is to create a section that will group various controllers. The third step was to create a controller that is assigned under a section and controls one setting. A lot of people get confused with the difference between the add setting and add control methods. The setting will create the database value. This method will not create an input field. It will just tell WordPress about this setting and tell it to create a setting in the database. The control method will not create a database value. Instead, it will create an input field. The control will take care of modifying and updating the database value whenever the input field is updated. Alright, now that we've cleared that up, let's start making our theme recognize the changes. Inside the header template, let's locate the list of social icons in the header. Inside a conditional statement, I'm going to call the function getThemeMod. This function will grab a setting you pass in. If there is no value or the value does not exist, then this will return false. I'm going to pass in JU Facebook handle. This is the setting we created earlier. If there is a value, then we'll output this one list item, which is the Facebook link. I'm going to replace the URL for this with the Facebook URL, followed by the value returned by the theme mod function. We will have to echo out the value since the function will only return it. That's it. Let's go back to the customizer and you will now see our link appearing. If I were to empty out this text field, you'll notice the iframe refresh and the link disappear. This is exactly what we want. The only thing left to do is to tackle the rest of these icons. I want you to try this on your own. Actually, before I let you off, there's one last thing we should do together. Create a folder inside the includes folder named customizer. Create a file named social.php. Inside this file, create a function named JU Social Customizer section. This function will accept the WP Customize object. I'm going to cut and paste the contents from the main customizer function into this function. Then, I'm going to call this function from the main customizer and pass in the customize object. The last step is to just include this social customizer file. By doing this, we make things a lot cleaner and easier to manage. These social icons aren't the only things we'll be using the customizer for. This here is just preference and not required by WordPress itself. I just like to stay organized and clean. So, I want you to create the new settings now. All you'll be doing is creating new settings and controllers. You'll only need one section, which we already defined. Once you have those ready, then you can modify the theme itself to include the links. Welcome back. If you weren't able to do it, then no worries. I have you covered. As you can see here, I already have everything set up. I'm going to provide the social customize function in the resource section so you can download it and compare it to your own function. I also made modifications to the header and footer to include these settings onto the theme. I won't be providing these as these are just really simple and aren't as difficult to replicate. If you don't know how to do this, then you really need to rewatch this lecture because there's nothing advanced going on in these templates. I'll see you in the next lecture.